Thank you, Thomas, for the topic of air charge versus PSI. PSI and air charge. Let's go and let's use this bottle to demonstrate PSI and air charge. PSI, obviously pressure per square inch. If I take this bottle and I cool it down to 40 degrees, let's take away the carbonation. Just keep an idea that this bottle of air has it's a set amount of air here. And at 40 degrees or 100 degrees, we can agree that if I leave the lid on, the mass, the amount of air in this bottle can't change. The pressure, however, will. Now, how does this come into role when it comes down to the Civic Type R? And we're dealing with air charge. And we have a wastegate, we have a wastegate actuator. And why does this differ so much compared to other cars that are PSI based? Because the Civic Type R is, we hear all these numbers about PSI, but it's not PSI based. It's designed to hit a certain air charge. So let's say that in this bottle we have 200 air charge. Whether it be 40 degrees out or 90 degrees out, as long as you don't have an IAT reduction set in there, and you have a 200 air charge target, the car is going to do what it can to hit 200 air charge. This means that at 40 degrees or 90 degrees, the car will make the same power. That means that you had the same amount of available oxygen reach inside the engine to create the same amount of burn to make the same amount of power. There might be slight variations due to temperature, but to put this in perspective, I had the car in the dyno, and I did 6 runs. 535, 535, 534, 533, 534, 535. You get the idea. Those 6 runs were done within an hour. If I took a non-air charge based car, you'd see 535, 535, 530, 525, 520. You get the idea what would happen. Because this wastegate would be set to a set opening so that the turbo was limited to a set amount of work rate. Well, because we have an electronic actuator and we don't have a duty cycle, the wastegate is allowed to adjust to what the computer needs to create the 200 air charge. Let's remember, just hypothetically stick to that number, and let's say 200 air charge makes 400 horsepower. So we're at sea level, and we're hitting the mass airflow, or mass air meter, which is the sensor that dictates the air charge. It measures the mass of air that has gone past, that goes into the engine. So let's just say at sea level, the car only needs to open the close the wastegate 60%. Just like I said, hypothetical numbers. And we go to 5, and we hit our 200 air charge, therefore we have 400 wheel horsepower. There is a little bit of rolling heat, but trust me guys when I tell you, it's not that much if you hit the same air charge. Air charge is air charge. So we go to 5,000 feet. So now the wastegate closes like 90%, but we still hit our same 200 air charge. Yeah, I know it's a Coke bottle, it's whatever, just you get the idea. We still hit the same 200 air charge. We're still burning the same amount of oxygen. We're still using the same amount of fuel. The boost pressure may vary a little, but we're still making the same power, and this is very true. This is Pirelli made this very statement quite some time ago about how between run to run to run, when they were testing their drop-in turbo on their prototype, that the boost pressures varied, but the horsepower was the same again and again and again and again and again. So where does this come into play with a little bit different also when it comes down to horsepower and what you see in dynos and dyno compensation? And I know I've brought this up, and this is probably the best time to bring up why this is a problem with this car specifically. Because the turbo work rate is fully variable. It is. The turbo work rate is fully variable. You can't take a duty cycle based car that has a set duty cycle and give it a fully variable work rate on the turbo, because it's going to be limited by a duty cycle. Since these cars are not duty cycle limited, it permits them to increase the turbo work rate to make the same power. So if you have a car that at sea level hit, and like I said, at 5,000 feet, we go to a dyno, we can have the same exact dyno. The other dyno at 5,000 feet sees the barometric pressure loss, but it doesn't know that the car is working the turbo harder to put the same amount of air in. So the dyno that's at 5,000 feet is going to add to the horsepower number. I have an exact example. I have a car that was on the dyno, and it made 415 wheel uncorrected. The actual power output was 415 wheel. It hit the target air charge that it was set to. The dyno, because it doesn't understand that the turbo is going to, the work rate's going to increase in order to compensate, compensated the number to 500 wheel horsepower. And this goes the same for temperature too. So if it's 95 degrees out and you're still hitting the same air charge, you're still going to make the same power. There's very little variance. And I've done back-to-back dyno runs to prove this. and it's well documented. So this is where the problem comes in. It could be, even if you're, another issue could be your dyno temp sensor is in a very hot spot of the shop for some reason, and the actual car is at like 70 degrees and the dyno temp sensor reads 90. That adds 10, 15 wheel horsepower right there. So this is where we kind of come into some issues with misconceptions of power. But don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on these people. I'm just saying this is where some of the misconceptions come in. And this is, but the other token, keep this in mind, a 400 wheel horsepower Civic Type R, a real 400 wheel horsepower, like an uncorrected, and what the car actually made right there, which is why I like the uncorrected number, because the uncorrected number is what it made right there. The uncorrected number is what you're actually making. So if we take two cars that are uncorrected, you're gonna see that 415 wheel horsepower is nasty. It's downright nasty in that car, and 500 is kind of like otherworldly. It's really above and beyond what a lot of what we think out there. But keep this in mind. And this is also why the testament that I go back to about mile per hour and the quarter mile is kind of like the true tell-all. 500 wheel horsepower car, if we're not spinning in place, okay, in a front-wheel drive car, keep in mind, they back half really good, so they really usually pick up some mile an hour. A 500 wheel horsepower Type R should be in 130 mile an hour range, or really close to it. So, this is where a lot of that whole mix-up, air charge, PSI, and why a lot of understanding is totally lost, because this platform is totally different. This is nothing like cars of the past. And obviously, you can make 550 wheel horsepower, but you make it for like 200 RPM. Obviously that car is not going to go 135 miles an hour in a quarter mile. Power band, it does make a difference, obviously, there, you know, if you're not bringing in power to the absolute last second. And last quick topic, tires. They actually, believe it or not, on the dyno, tires can have a bit of effect. So if you have a super sticky tire, and I don't mean a Michelin Pilot S4 because that's not super sticky, like a Toyo R888R tire. Those are compounds that as they are on the roller and as they roll, they start to stick to the actual roller, and that creates rolling resistance, which brings the numbers down some. So if you're going to go to the dyno, I do suggest, if you have a regular pair of tires, like a regular set of summer tires, Toyo, I had my stock rim and tire that I put on last time so I could get a more accurate representation so that I'm not literally sticking to the roller and chewing rubber as I go along. That's going to help you guys find more of where your car is really at. So, and like I said, turn off the dyno compensation. You want to see what it is, or if your dyno correction is 1.00, thumbs up, you're good. Or if your dyno correction is below 1, okay, that means that it took away power for temperature. And remember, again, we're dealing with an air charge. That's another thing with temperature. So if your 200 air charge set to hit at 440 degrees and your 200 air charge is set at 90 degrees, it isn't fair to go on a dyno At 40 degrees, you hit your 200 air charge, and the dyno subtracts 10%. So this is why I suggest, if you guys are going to dyno and because we're dealing with air charge, I suggest you guys turn around and ask for an uncorrected horsepower number, because that's going to be what your car's making right then, right there. No extra add-on, no reduction. That's what the car makes. So thanks again for watching, and keep in mind, tires, man, tires do make a difference. I do said on the dyno that it loses numbers on the dyno. That doesn't make the car slower on the street. The effect of the way the roller works on the tires on the dyno versus on the street is two different things. You don't have that same loss as you do there. It's not quite the same thing. You actually should be relatively the same, unless you're like on some super sticky, ungodly tire that no one knows of existence. You get the point. And trying to take car tires, like all-season tires, and okay, we're at 400 horsepower, we're blowing the tires off, and you're like, oh, I want more power, I want to go faster. You're not going to go faster if you make 500 wheel horsepower on the same tires. Maybe if you start from 100-mile-an-hour roll, but tires make a difference, guys. Don't go around, oh, I make 500 wheel horsepower, you get your doors blown off by a regular Charger SRT8. Well, that's because you spun the tires so badly that any grip that was there, because beyond a 3 to 4% slip rate, that the loss of traction is a domino effect. At 6% slip rate, the loss of traction is more than double. It's like quadruple that it was at 3% slip rate. So don't just go throwing horsepower at the car, and not change the tires either. So dyno on a regular tire, but on the street, you really want to take it serious and make some, show that the car really has, put some good tires on it. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know about the next topic that you want to hear about.